Hi, I'm Lori.
And I'm Kevin, and this is No Longer Ashamed.
We are survivors of childhood sexual abuse.
And we're here to share with you that if you're a survivor, you don't have to be alone.
Our logo is a salamander, and the reason is a fire salamander can survive a fire, and you have survived a fire.
We want to help you with your journey to healing and hope.
We are all survivors together, and we walk this journey together, and you are not alone.
By telling our stories, we are hoping that you will have the courage to share your stories as well and find your voice.
Because stories are so important, and for so long I know that I wouldn't tell my story, but when I finally shared my story, that's when I got my freedom.
And this is our journey and your journey to healing and hope. So come with us.
Repressed memories. We've touched on it a little bit. We're going to jump into it a little more.
Yeah, especially since many of our guests have talked about repressed memories. Our first guest, actually, Mike Chapman, talked about his repressed memories, and I think it's a very divisive topic. I think there's concern that maybe some people have suppressed or suggested memories, but there's signs that you can have if you have repressed memories, even if you don't recognize having repressed memories. There's certain things that can kind of give you an indication that maybe you are having repressed memories, having severe nightmares or night traumas or flashbacks. If you have intense emotional reactions to certain places or even certain people that might remind you of something that happened, you might be having an intense reaction and not understand why. You can have really drastic emotional shifts in your emotions, going from being elated to being extremely upset or being anxious a lot of the time. Those can be signs that something is going on that you're not quite aware of.
And they're such a protection to repress a memory because there's no help. It's really a gift to a child. But what happened for me was when I began to recognize I had repressed memories, how it came out was severe panic attacks. I didn't know what a panic attack was, but there were some moments, some triggers that happened for me. And I actually was very healthy and young, but I thought I was going to die. I had these crazy feelings and I thought, like, is this an impending doom? Is this a premonition? I didn't know what was happening. And that's when I finally went for counseling. But what happened was a very well-known Christian radio host came out against repressed memories and totally swayed the world because of his influence. He didn't look at it as some people lie, some people might, maybe a counselor might implant a memory. But the thing was they went full on repressed memories are evil. They're from the devil and they're bad. And that silenced me for the next 20 years because the people who had abused me loved that. They loved it. And they told everyone who would listen that we had false repressed memories, that we had gone to counselors and they had implanted these memories in us. And woe is them, beautiful, wonderful Christian people who were being falsely accused, although we were not accusing them in any kind of public way. We just spoke our truth to them and our counselors and went on our way. We weren't trying to, when I say we, I mean me. I wasn't trying to prove anything or make the world know. And it was before social media. I just needed to get on with my life and know my truth. And that doctor came against repressed memories, silenced me. And often that's what happens with victims. There will be something that happens that maybe somebody lies. So now everybody lies. And we see this in child abuse cases where a child's been abused. And then one time somebody will cry abuse when it really isn't. And they base everything on that one person that did that bad thing. Now we have to make all these laws and all these rules because now everyone's going to do that. And it's so sad to me. And for me, having those memories, I wanted to know them all right away. And I'm so grateful that I didn't get them all back at once. But as I got them back, I knew what I knew. They were no longer a memory. They were my truth. I knew that they had happened, but there was no way a small child could deal with those kind of things. And so, the body does what it can to survive.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the important things about this is closely related to dissociative disorder. And I think at young ages, when we experience trauma, our mind has to do something to protect us. And one of those ways is by repressing the memories. But unfortunately, there's still trauma is still there. We're still affected by the trauma. And that's one of the ways you can kind of tell that something happened is because you are having symptoms of having experienced trauma. You have the symptoms of PTSD. You're
or
having,
or behaviors.
yeah, of being, exposed to trauma. And if you don't understand why you're having those, then there might be something that's repressed, but it's hard to unlock that. Oftentimes it does happen, like you were talking about. All of a sudden, something in your life triggers a response. And in your case, it was panic attacks. Oftentimes it's when men or women become parents and their children are at that age. When their children are at the age that they experience the trauma, they might start being triggered by that, or you might be triggered by seeing someone that reminds you of the perpetrator, or being in a place that reminds you of where it happened. But if you're experiencing these symptoms and you don't understand why, it can be very important to find, maybe look into it. But
For me, it was both. My kids were a certain age, and I was actually out riding horses in a place I hadn't ridden before, and we came across a property, and there were things there. I don't know what they were, but whatever was there in that area is what triggered it. So it was twofold. And I was so grateful to have a good friend that encouraged me to get counseling. And I had no money and no insurance. I called and got no response. And every day she would say, will you call one more person? And finally, I got someone that called me back, and I said, I don't have any money. And she goes, you just come in and we'll see what we can do. And she told me about crime victims compensation. And I was able to get that to pay for my counseling. But bless her for calling me back, for not just being like, well, you don't have insurance.
Yeah, I think it's important to find someone that can help you that's experienced with trauma, experienced with this type of trauma, especially if you don't know what the trauma was, because it can take a while to find out where that experience came from if you're not remembering it. If you're just having this anxiety or trauma response and you don't know where it's coming from, it can take a while to kind of unlock that. And
But if you find somebody safe, because I found somebody really safe, and so once I recognized, it took me a while to realize that person was safe, but there's something that started to happen for me that I could trust this person. And so then the memories started to flow. And I had the panic attacks. I had young children. I also had finally named my mom's mental illness, which was in that day, we called multiple. Now they call it dissociative. So I grew up with that. And I learned how to camouflage. I learned how to be a chameleon, because that's what I learned from growing up in that atmosphere, along with all the other things. So there were really some layers we had to dig through to get to all the stuff. And I was so grateful she had a knowledge base about trauma. Otherwise, there are people that aren't really trained in that, and they may not recognize the red flags. But she recognized the ones I didn't recognize, things I would say that just seemed common to me. Like, I can't think of anything, but something I might say off the cuff. And she would say, that not everybody says that, right? I'm like, what? She goes, not everyone's parents are like that, right? I'm like, what? So she was able to mirror back to me stuff that I thought, because I thought my childhood was normal. Isn't that funny? Well, and she was able to mirror that back to me. So that was, and often there's layers of things that, maybe there's one trauma, but maybe there's other things of parents fighting, or maybe you have a disabled sibling, or, you know what I mean? There's so many things. And when we can get someone that really understands and doesn't just focus on the one obvious thing.
Yeah. And or doesn't, wants to just treat the symptoms and not go into where the symptoms are coming from. Often in our society, we just want to treat the symptoms and get better and get over it and get past it, rather than actually go to the root of the cause, what the trauma was, and actually get healing by actually going through it. And, there's so many ways. It might not even be obvious. Like you said, you were a chameleon. A lot of people do do trauma stuffing, or there's a term for it, where you basically treat your trauma with either food or spending or binging on social media. There's all these things that you do just to numb yourself, from the trauma. And they don't, you can try and cure yourself from, overeating, but you're not going to the root of why you're overeating. Or you can try and stop social media for a while, or stop spending money online, whatever it is you're doing to kind of stuff the trauma down. You can fix that, so to speak, but you're not addressing the root cause, which is the trauma that you experienced and why you're trying to hide from that trauma.
That's so good. Or comfort yourself. I interviewed a lady the other day and she was talking about she had struggled with her weight forever. And she went to a doctor to get help and he would not help her with her weight. He sent her to a trauma counselor. And I thought, how awesome that he recognized that. And then she started to get the help. And guess what? The weight dropped off.
Yeah, because you no longer need to treat that by stuffing it down if you actually get to it. And that's the kind of the key to this, is if you can find out what the root of your repressed memory is and actually deal with it. But it's so important to do it with a counselor, someone you trust, because it can be traumatic. Yeah. I mean, it can be very traumatic.
Yeah, and scary.
Yeah, you can go through a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear.
Well, and especially our amygdala, whenever we face those issues again, it thinks it's happening right now. Mm-hmm. So if you're with someone safe, they can talk you through it. That was in the past. Right now you're safe. And then you can release those memories because somebody is telling you it's safe, because in your brain, when you're remembering, it's as though you are back there.
Yeah, you're experiencing that fear, flight, trauma, and which is, a symptom of PTSD or multiple PTSD, or what do they call it? Compound PTSD, I think.
Or complex.
Complex, yes, that's it, complex, yeah. I know, I'm pretty sure I had complex PTSD considering all the different types of traumas I experienced. But the important thing is to remember to find a safe place to do it in, because you will be triggering that fear flight response, and it won't feel safe at the time unless you're in an environment that is reassuring.
Right. And even though it may be very terrifying, and even though I want to say this carefully, there is freedom and safety on the other side. For some people that are still involved with the people, it may feel like there's not. But even at that, a good trauma counselor will know of police or shelters or places that if you're not safe, you can go. So that's the value of finding somebody that really knows. When I was going through a very difficult time, actually being stalked, I had people that knew how to help me and gave me tips and tricks. For me at that moment, it wasn't leaving right away, but it was having a plan and having things in my car and my trunk. So you may feel like on the other side is not freedom because there's still a very scary person in your life. But even at that, there is help on that people that can help you get out of a domestic violence situation or be able to help you. So, it's easy to think, well, not in my case, but there is extreme and good help. And if you have a good counselor, they're going to know who to connect you with, how to help you, and how to help you get a plan so that you do it on your terms and you feel safe. Nobody's going to force you to do anything that you're not ready to do. That if you get a good counselor, if you get a bad counselor, they may force you to do things that you're not ready to and will push you right back into all that trauma. But so find a trauma informed counselor. And if you're feeling like, yeah, but these people are still in my life, there's still good help, good wisdom, good advice, and good plans to help you navigate all of that.
Yeah, and if you don't have a counselor or don't know where to find a counselor, you can call the hotlines, the crisis lines, and they can help you find counselors that are trained in trauma. You can find out from the what options are available to you as far as getting help safely.
Yeah, 988 is the crisis line. There's also in Washington State, I don't know if it's everywhere, but it's 211 and it's the information center, and they can give you those hotlines, and they know where about the DV shelters because DV shelters aren't going to just be advertised. They don't want people to find them. So you need help finding them. And it is scary. And, if you are still in a difficult situation, but there is help, even if you're in the midst of it. And we have on our webpage, we have Doug, who's a counselor. We have some counselors too that might be able to help you out. Or, there's so many resources. And the biggest thing is just being willing to love yourself enough to say, yes, it's time. I'm ready. I'm ready to get help and get free from this pain.
So I guess the big question is, how do you know if you have repressed memories? And I think the best way to tell is if you're having these extreme emotions or reactions or traumatic flashbacks, traumatic nightmares, night terrors, all these symptoms of trauma.
There's another symptom that you didn't mention that was for me. And I hate to put it in these words, but it's overreacting. Mm-hmm. So for instance, I was at a state fair and all of a sudden I couldn't see my child. Now, I knew my child was close, but all my trauma came up. I was absolutely freaking out. And my husband was like, my God, he's right here.
Yeah.
Like, he's right behind you. So sometimes if you're overreacting to situations and people are like, oh, what's the problem?
What's up with
there
that?
Might be more behind that. So listen to it. Pay attention. Don't just go, oh, I'm an overreactor. Go, what is happening? Give yourself some grace. Yeah.
And maybe look at the situation that caused that response. If you're having extreme anxiety and you don't understand it, if it's only in certain times or when you see certain people, maybe look at what you think is triggering it. Another one is disassociation. If I know that for me, I was really good at disassociating and I never thought it was an issue. I never thought it was a problem, but it is. It can lead you to just check out a lot. If you tend to check out in certain instances, certain circumstances, maybe pay attention to why, what is causing you to check out in these certain times.
Yeah. And part of that, for me, the checking out was doing something mindless. So for some people, it might be eating, shopping, doing those things you talked about. But if all of a sudden you've lost a couple of hours, you're like, oh my goodness, what has happened? And it's not because you're doing something you love and enjoy. It might be because you're disassociating. And when I recognized that, I actually had to pay attention and work on it. So if I found myself wanting to go do that thing that I was doing to disassociate, to be mindless, then I would set a timer. So I would do it for 15 minutes. For me, it was playing the kids' video games. So ridiculous. But I would set a timer and then I would be like, okay, I'm going to go do the dishes and go do some laundry. But I had to pay attention and I wasn't able to cold turkey, but I was able to, I just need a minute to check out. And I check out for 15 minutes. Nobody got hurt.
Yeah.
No, the house didn't burn down. And then I got back to it. So once I became aware of it, then I was able to work really hard. And I very rarely do that anymore. And if I do, I recognize it and I do some, I do what I need to. But also it's that daily self-work of paying attention and recognizing I'm always going to be in recovery. And in a way, that's a gift because it means I'm always working on myself. I'm always doing devotionals or whatever, feeds my soul and self-help. So for me, that's kind of how it plays out. But yeah, I had to really pay attention and work on not disassociating anymore because it was a habit. I mean, it would happen, but then it became a habit. If I couldn't cope, I just...
Yeah, I think that's the problem is if we ignore this, then our coping mechanisms get in the way of progressing, of doing,
life.
Yeah. And so it's important to recognize our coping mechanisms and then look into where they came from. What was at the root of these reasons we're coping in this way? For me, I know being mindful was really important because I did dissociate a lot. Just trying to be in the moment helps a lot. And when I notice anxiety coming up, I just try to be aware of my surroundings, be aware of myself. I know for me, when I woke up from night terrors, I had to literally talk myself down because it felt like I was that little kid and trapped, and I'd wake up in an absolute panic. And I'd have to look at myself, remember that I'm an adult. I'm in a safe place. I didn't have to be afraid. I had to walk through all those things of being mindful of being in the present, just to calm myself down and get in the moment rather than being in that place of terror.
I
And
feel like we need something like the stop, drop, and roll or the stop, look, and listen. When you feel it coming on, it's like stop and then just be in that moment, because that's what I just interviewed a guy, Dr. Ski Chilton, and he wrote a book called There's Another Way to Happiness. And he was very successful making a ton of money, but he wasn't happy. And what he recognized is that he wasn't able to enjoy the moment or stop in the moment. He was dealing with a child with addiction, so it wasn't like just not enjoying the moment. But what he recognizes, number one, he was trying to rescue his child.
yeah,
And so when he started to get into that world, he would stop and breathe and absolutely pay attention to what was going on in the moment. And often that's when we go, oh, I really am safe, or, oh, I really am okay, or, oh, like you said, I am actually an adult now. So I feel like maybe we need to create some sort of a
yeah.
stop,
Maybe
drop, and roll. Don't do that, especially if you're on the street. But
yeah. Don't do it when you're crossing the street. That'd be a bad idea. Don't stop, drop, and roll. But yeah, I think this would be a good idea for a panel. We can have more, because we've both experienced repressed memories. We've both experienced dissociative disorder, and we've both kind of had to deal with. I still have repressed memories, and I know many of our guests have. So
yeah.
this might be a good panel to talk about it, how we've realized it, where it came from, and also what changed after we started recovering those memories, and how did we deal with that, and how do we deal with those coping mechanisms. I know for me, yeah, just being in the moment was the best thing when I would want to disassociate, or I would want to cope with other methods, just trying to be in the moment and remembering that I wasn't that kid that needed to find safety.
I remember when I knew I was going to be okay, I was in counseling, and not at the moment, but I had started with a counselor. I was in the kids' parking lot of their school, and something triggered me. I didn't know what it was, but all of a sudden I couldn't breathe, and I was like, wow, this is it. And so I was just ready to get in my car, and I would have just driven away, but I just stood at my door and I looked around, and I actually recognized what was triggering me. And I took a deep breath and I told myself the truth. This is now, that was then. I was able to recognize here in this moment, this is a whole different thing, just because people might look the same or act the same. But they're not the person. It's not the same. But taking that moment, because now I recognized it. It wasn't 3 days later where I went, oh, I checked out. Like,
Yeah.
Not that I check out for 3 days, but then, looking back, reflecting, and I was able to stop in the moment. It didn't make it much easier. It was still hard because that memory was there of what had happened, but I recognized that I was safe, and I could go talk to my counselor. I could go journal. I could work through this. And I knew, oh no, oh, this is great. I have the tools now to be able to get myself through these scenarios.
Yeah, that's the thing. When we are triggered like that and we're in that fight or flight mode, it's real easy to just completely be overwhelmed. But there are ways of calming yourself down so you don't react. Instead, you can just control yourself. I mean, there's ways of, doing breathing exercises, being aware of your surroundings, looking at all the details rather than and counting, doing things to calm yourself down so you're not in that reacting mode.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Or trying to run away from it, and then rather than be like, oh, I don't have to run. Look at that. I don't have to flee. And that, for me, that's what was powerful, is I wanted to get in my car and just floor it
take
out of there.
off.
And it was like, no. And, there are so many great tools now. We talked about the ganglia block. There's tapping. There's EMDR. There are so many ways. And something might work for Kevin that doesn't work for me, or I might do something that doesn't. But how awesome that we have some tools and breathing techniques that can really help us.
Yeah. And of course, there's ways to try to regain those repressed memories. And there's a lot of methods, but it's very important to do it in a safe setting that's going to be safe for you, because it can be very, very frightening, very fearful to go through those, to experience those memories again.
Yeah.
But I
And
think,
our body wants to protect us. So if you feel like you're, maybe you've thought, am I having repressed memories? The best thing is to find a coach, a counselor, someone to do it with you, because doing it alone can be scary. And plus your brain might tell you something different, but also free writing. If you start writing something about getting it out of your brain onto paper can help. And that's something you can also share with your coach or counselor if
yeah,
things get revealed by doing that.
yeah. And free writing, you mean writing without thinking about it, without just basically writing and not worrying about the punctuation or the spelling, or even you could use your other hand
Yeah,
and
even if you
write.
say, I don't know what's happening, but I just, this is weird. Like, I'm just sitting here. I can't think of anything. Like, sometimes when we do that, then our brain starts to release it. Cause when you first pick up a pencil, it wants to feel like, oh, paragraph. Oh, but free writing is just whatever comes out of whatever's in your head. Oh, the sky
Yeah,
is blue. Oh, I see a bird fly by, and just random things until all of a sudden it's crazy how it works. And you're just like writing pages and pages.
yeah. You're allowing your mind to just go on a path without trying to control it, without
Yeah.
trying to
Yeah.
edit it.
Like you might see dragon. Well, it might be because when you were a little kid, that's what it seemed like. So you just let it be. You just say the words that come out because that child is not an adult and didn't know names for things, maybe.
Yeah, I think journaling can be really important. I think one of the more helpful things is if you journal without worrying about anyone seeing it. You don't worry about what anyone's going to say about it. If you don't worry about, someone else seeing it and you being embarrassed by what you're writing. So it's
Mhm.
important that if you do journal, that you are able to have that safety. If you have people you're afraid are going to read it or get a hold of it, you might have to just throw it away afterwards. But
Yeah.
just the act of journaling can be very
Mhm.
important, even if you don't save it.
I've told people burn it after or tear it up, but
Yeah,
it's the act of getting it out. And often people feel like journaling is documenting. And really, if you go in with that, you're going to edit yourself. If you
yeah.
just go in going, I'm going to just get all this out of my head and then throw it away, it might give you the freedom to
To
do.
write
Yeah.
whatever comes to your mind. If you're worried about someone reading it or going back and reading it later, or if you're doing it for a purpose, you want to record these things, you're not going to give yourself that freedom to write down whatever comes to your mind. But if you do it and just throw it away, it's almost like it doesn't matter, but it does matter because you're allowing your mind to just flow.
Well, and there's the science that says as long as it's in our head, it doesn't file. But the minute it comes out, either in words, this is why coaching is so beautiful, is when people start talking. Often, I can't tell you how many people have thanked me for solving their problem. I didn't solve it. I just gave a safe place for them to talk and talk and talk until they started to figure it out. Or when you write and write and write, and it gets out of your head, and suddenly then your brain can process and file it. But as long as it's bouncing around, it doesn't go anywhere. It just keeps bouncing around. So this gives it a place to go, and then it can give it a name, actually.
Yeah. And I think that's part of what happens when you start working on repressed memories, when you start trying to recover them, is at first your brain doesn't allow you because of the fear and anxiety behind it. But as you start to go there and you find out you're still safe, you don't have to be afraid, then it allows it to come out. It finds that safe place to let you have those memories.
And know what, yeah. And also, I would say this in the beginning, I wanted to know everything. I felt like I needed to know, I deserved to know. And then there came a point as things came out little by little where I just prayed and I said, God, only give me what I need to know to change my behaviors and be the person you want me to be. If there's anything I don't really need to know, I give permission for that to just go away. And that
Yeah.
was huge for me because in the beginning, it's kind of like, I need to know everything. And if it would have all flooded in, it would have been too much. I mean, there was at one point where my counselor said, I don't know why you're not in a mental hospital.
Mm.
She said, with all these things that have come out. And she's complimented me on my coping skills, which
Uh-huh.
of course I was there to change. So they helped me to survive, but now I'm an adult and it's time to change those skills out. I thought that was really interesting. It's like, yeah, they helped you and let's say thank you, but now we're going to start coping differently. And that was really beautiful. It was really awesome to know that somebody could walk with me and help me and show me different ways to do things.
And that's the whole point about dealing with this is we might not even be aware that we have repressed memories, but we are coping, and the ways we're coping might not be healthy, might not be good for us.
Or
And
our
if
families.
or our families or our relationships. And if we just address those coping mechanisms, but don't go to the root of it, we're just going to find other coping mechanisms because our brain is going to want to protect us in that way. I mean, it was very valuable at the time that we experienced trauma that our brain did protect us. That was very important because, it's really difficult to go through trauma and not have effects, but our brain protects us in different ways. And if one of them was repressed memories, well, that trauma is still there and still affecting us. And if we just deal with the coping mechanisms, we're not addressing the trauma that caused them, and we'll just find other coping mechanisms down the line because that's the way our brain protects us.
Right. And I think for me, the biggest thing was knowing I wasn't alone. Like,
yeah.
I thought once I recognized my childhood wasn't normal, I thought I was the only one. And that's the good thing that counseling and support did is it helped me realize, oh, I'm not the only one on this journey. And, we have statistics on our page. I can't remember now what they are. Do you remember the statistics of people that were abused?
Well, they
4 out of 10 or
1 in 4 women by the age of 18 have been sexually abused, and 1 in 6 men by the age of 18 have had
which we
sexual
know
trauma. And that's just what they are, the estimates, because it's so underreported.
Right. I've been saying about 40% of people.
Yeah.
And that's what seems to be happening. I mean, I'm seeing it when I interview people. I'm hearing it on podcasts. Like it'll be like this podcast that's about business. And then the person will be like, by the way, I was abused. I got help and you can get help too. And I'm like, wait a minute. So we're not alone and we don't have to suffer in silence and we don't have to feel like something is wrong with us. I mean, we may feel like that, but we can get free from that and get help and know that, for instance, we talked about the complex trauma or complex shame when people say, well, it wasn't your fault. And then the person is like, yeah, but I didn't say no. I didn't fight it because of that fight, flight, fawn. And so they believe that they had a part in it. And so it keeps them from sharing. And the truth is it was not your fault. Whether you went along with it, your brain did what it had to survive. That's what happened.
And Dr. Carpenter talks about the difference between arousal and desire. And for men, this is a big topic because often when they're being sexually abused, there's arousal on their part. And so they feel guilty about that. They feel guilty about being aroused and being stimulated. But there's a difference. The difference between arousal and desire is huge. And so that is a huge part of learning about yourself and why you feel guilty about what happened to you, even though someone did it to you. You're feeling this guilt because you think you were aroused, so therefore you wanted it.
Yeah. That when push comes to shove, it's going to be your fault.
Yeah. So I think repressed memories. We might do a panel about this. Get some of the other guests on to talk about their experiences and also how they learned about the repressed memories and what worked for them as far as addressing them.
Yeah, that would be really helpful. And I think because it feels like I know there's been times when you've said about a memory like you weren't sure. And I've heard guests say, well, I wasn't really sure, but it's because it's been repressed for so long. And I think that's where some of the confusion comes in and people can easily point a finger and say, that's a false repressed memory. But no child would choose this. And that's where I think the difference is. But there are people that will manifest things for attention. There are counselors that might, try to, I don't know, I can't imagine, but that might
Yeah.
suggest things. But I don't know the percentage, but there's a huge, huge percentage of us that have real repressed memories. We're not making anything up. We wouldn't. And if by getting them out, we can have a better life, then that is good news.
Yeah. And it's often obvious that something happened to you because you're having these coping mechanisms because of the trauma. Even
Mhm.
if the trauma is not apparent, even if you can't remember it or put a name to it, or you don't have that. But if you're experiencing these effects of trauma, that could mean that there's something there. There's something that's causing. And I think I remember Mike was talking about the reason he started learning about his repressed memories is he was having so many issues with the coping mechanisms he was having from his trauma, but he didn't remember his trauma. But he started getting help for his coping mechanisms. And that was, what led him to remember or find those memories. So,
Well, and even think about Nathan, even though most of his wasn't repressed, he had so not wanted anyone to know because he believed the abuser when he said, your parents chose me to look out for you. And it took, somebody really sitting down with him and saying, I can't even be around you because of your behavior.
yeah.
And then he had to take a look at, well, why am I behaving this way? And then he made that connection. And, he wrote the book, he's got a TED Talk. And I think he's just a great example of we don't have to hold this. We don't
Yeah.
have to live this life of guilt and shame because we think it was our fault.
Yeah. So I guess take a look at if you're having issues and coping in ways that aren't healthy, maybe get help to find out what could be causing these mechanisms, these coping strategies that are
Mhm.
affecting you.
Yeah. Well, this is when we take time and pray. I hope this was helpful. I know sometimes just knowing that somebody else has dealt with it or that, oh, that might not just be anxiety, that might be something
Yeah.
bigger. And exploring it never hurts. If it turns out that you're having anxiety and it's not a repressed memory, well, that's good news too. At least you're getting help for your anxiety.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, even if it isn't trauma induced, it's still important to deal with the whatever your coping mechanisms are that are or the different effects that you're having, as far as anxiety, severe anxieties, nightmares, night terrors, all those things. It's
Right.
certainly worth getting help for those.
And often, like you might see something on the news and you don't recognize this. What happened to me? I saw something on the news that was similar to something I experienced. And it took me a couple days to figure out what it was. So you may hear a story about a coach that has abused a child and you're acting weird. You don't know why. And then you start to remember, oh my goodness, that happened with my coach. Like,
Mhm.
so there might be something that's similar that you hear on the news or the radio that triggers it. And that, if you recognize you're behaving, like for me, I was just start bumbling. I was like cleaning the house and doing like, what is happening? And then I was able to go, oh, because that was a long news story. And that was back when, before internet. So we would have the TV on and the news at 5. And I was hearing it every day. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, now I get it. So,
Yeah, it's worth it to get the help. It's worth it to get healing,
mhm.
and for you and for your family and all your relationships.
Yes.
So maybe there's something that you just aren't aware of yet that can help you get healing.
And the good news is there is healing, there is hope.
Yes. So that's it for today.
We are going to have a prayer time if you want to stick with us. If not, we believe in you.
We want to hear from you. We want to hear your stories.
If you like this podcast, please rate and review because that's how other people can find us. And we really want to spread this message.
Father, I thank you for all your blessings, and I thank you for your persistence in our lives and your wanting to heal us, and that you don't blame us for what happened to us, but you want us to get healing for it, and you want us to get healing for those around us so that we can be better relationships with those around us. And Lord, I just pray you would be present with those who are listening today and just let them know that there is healing and there is hope, that you are there for them and you want them to get that healing. And Lord, I just pray for anyone listening that if they have questions, if they have doubts, if they're wondering, that they would be able to find the help that they need, get some resolve on what might have happened to them. I just pray that you would be there in their process, Lord. In your name, I pray.
I thank you for the amazing way that our human brain works, that we're able to do these things as children to protect ourselves. And we hear about this in all kinds of traumatic situations, and that our body and our brain will take over for us and help us to cope. And that then we become adults and we have to find new and better ways, and that we don't have to live with this, that there is an amount of suffering that continues into our adulthood, and that we do have the choice. We can choose to continue to suffer and be the victim, because when we don't get help, we remain the victim. And that, Lord, you've given us this freedom to share. You've given us people that can hear and counselors that can help, and that there is a world now for us that can help us get to a better place, and we can experience the joy and the freedom that you always wanted for us. And that in spite of trauma and tragedy, that there is hope and healing and a better life and a better way of coping. In your Son's holy name, amen.
Amen.